Slater Crusaders, welcome to the show. America's the greatest country in the world. I hope you had a great weekend. Fired up for this week, fired up for today's show, because coming up we're going to talk about maybe my favorite thing that the president has ever done in his last 3 years as president. So we'll talk about that coming up just a little bit, but let's get some politics here out of the way. So we played a clip last week of James Carville. He's the Democratic strategist, and we played a clip of him on MSNBC freaking out on the Democrats for the Iowa debacle, and just in general saying the Democrats need to wake up, stop talking about stuff no one cares about, just snap out of it. That was last week. He did another interview over the phone, and he had some great lines in it, and I want to read some of that. He said the Democrats did well in 2018 because they didn't get distracted by nonsense. So the interviewer on Vox said, well, give me some examples. Like, what are some ways that Democrats are distracted today? And here's what Carville said. He said, we got candidates on the debate stage talking about open borders and decriminalizing illegal immigration. They're talking about doing away with nuclear energy and fracking. You got Bernie Sanders talking about letting criminals and terrorists vote from jail cells. It doesn't matter what you think about any of that, or if those are good arguments. Talking about it is not how you win a national election. It's not how you become a Bajorian party. Terrorists voting from jail cells, I love it. And then he went on to say, for F's sake, but I can't. We're not going to put that up we'll leave that part out. He said, here's another stupid thing. Democrats talking about free college tuition or debt forgiveness. But not only just talking about, that's one of the main premises of all the candidates is debt forgiveness. He said, I'm not here to talk about the idea. What I can tell you is that people all over this country worked their way through school, sent their kids to school, paid off student loans. They don't want to hear this blank. And you saw Warren confronted by an angry voter over this. It's just not a winning message. He went on, he said, I want to give you an example of the problem here, big picture. And this is one of the main themes that we talk about on the show. I know it's going to come up again in this next election. It was the foundational premise of the 2016 election was city versus country. And it goes back an old Aesop's fable, like 300 BC. Aesop had the story of the country mouse and the city mouse. It was an ancient theme that we saw in 2016. I think we're going to see it again here today. And here's a little version of that. He said, I want to give an example of the problem here. A couple weeks ago, Benjamin Applebaum, an economics professor for the New York Times, economics writer for the New York Times, posted a snarky tweet about how LSU canceled classes for the national championship game. And then he said, and here's the tweet right here. He said, do the Warren Sanders free public college proposals include LSU, or would it only apply to actual schools? And Carville goes on, you know how blanking patronizing that is to people in the South or the middle of the country? He said, first, LSU has an unusually high graduation rate, but that's not the point. It's the GD smugness. This is from a guy who lives in New York, serves on the Times editorial board, and there's not a single person, this is the key, there's not a single person he knows who doesn't pat him on the back for that kind of tweet. He's so blanking smart. He says this Applebaum guy, he doesn't speak for the Democrat. Does that visual make sense? So he makes that tweet out there. Oh, does it apply to all schools or just the real schools? He makes that tweet, and everyone he knows thinks that's just hilarious. Everyone he knows pats him on the back. Oh, you're so smart. Oh, that's so great. Isn't that hilarious? Applebaum doesn't speak for the Democratic Party, but he does represent the urbanist mindset. We can't win the Senate by looking down at people. The Democratic Party has to drive a narrative that doesn't give off vapors that we're smarter than everyone or culturally arrogant. Perfect, absolutely true. I got a clip of Mike Bloomberg, maybe we could play it later in the show or maybe tomorrow, saying the exact same stuff that the New York Times guy was saying, not that Carville's saying here, but the New York Times guy saying, just talking about the intelligentsia, and the people like us who could be here in this room. That's an actual quote he said. But how the intelligentsia can understand the nuanced arguments for, this is the example he gave, for why we should let men into girls' locker rooms. And we can understand the nuanced arguments about that people in the Midwest wouldn't understand. There's an actual quote. We'll play that clip. That's all, like that. I just want to introduce that because that's all true, and we're going to talk a lot more about that moving forward. But I really want to just quote James Carville on Bernie Sanders in particular. This is what he said. He said, look, Bernie Sanders isn't a Democrat. He's never been a Democrat. He's an ideologue. And I've been clear about this. If Bernie's the nominee, I'll vote for him. No question. I'll take an ideological fanatic over a career criminal, Donald Trump, any day. But he's not a Democrat. If Bernie Sanders pulled this thing out, which the Democratic Party won't let him do. The Democratic Party, just like the Republican Party, but the Democratic Party is a private club. There's nothing in the Constitution that says this is how we outline our primary process to decide who we vote for president. It's not a government thing. It's a private club. The Democratic Party, they came up with their own system to figure out who they're going to put up as their nominee, which means they can just do whatever they want. They have all these rules and these bylines and all this stuff, but whatever. If they want at the end of the day to have John Kerry and Hillary Clinton be the nominee, they'll just do it. All right, so they're a private club. So they're not going to let Bernie or Elizabeth Warren squeak through. But if they do, there will be even if Buttigieg or even if Biden too, but there will be a massive chasm between the two choices that you have in 2020. It will truly, truly be capitalism versus socialism. You know, a lot of elections, people are like, well, there's no difference between the two candidates. No. There will be a huge difference between the two candidates. Now, Chris Matthews, of all people, is trying to sound the alarm on all this, but I think it's too late. Here he is after, I don't know, this may be after one of the debates. I don't know what this is, but there's a big stage and everything, so it must be after something that happened.
To talk about the issue of this campaign. It is that word, socialism. Some people like it. Younger people like it. Those of us like me who grew up in the Cold War and saw some aspects of it after visiting places like Vietnam, like I have, and seeing countries like Cuba being there, I've seen what socialism is like. I don't like it. Okay? It's not only not free, it doesn't frickin' work.
We got one more clip here. Listen to how the other people on the stage disagree with Chris Matthews' assessment here. So Chris Matthews is trying to sound the alarm, but the other people on the stage aren't yet.
I don't want to get into, I'm on every night. I'll let the Democrats figure this out. I have my own views of the word socialist, and I'll be glad to share them with you in private. And they go back to the early 1950s. I have an attitude about them. I remember the Cold War. I have an attitude towards Castro. I believe if Castro and the Reds had won the Cold War, there would have been executions in Central Park, and I might have been one of the ones getting executed. And certain other people would be there cheering, okay? So I have a problem with people who took the other side. I don't know who Bernie supports over these years. I don't know what he means by social. 1 week it's Denmark. We're going to be like Denmark. Okay, that's harmless. That's basically a capitalist country with a lot of good social welfare programs. Denmark is harmless.
It's pretty clearly in the Denmark category, yeah.
Are you sure? How do you know? Did he tell you that?
Well, I mean, that's what he says, and that's what his agenda calls for, right?
Yeah. I love that line for Chris Matthews. How do you know? Right? The other guy's like, well, he's pretty clearly on the Denmark side. Really? How do you know? Well, that's his response. Well, how do you know? Trump has proposed a new spending plan that has real-life, genuine cuts in it. It's a very impressive framework. We'll talk about that maybe later today if we have time, but definitely this week. But Bernie has $60 trillion in new spending over the next 10 years. $60 trillion. Remember we talked about that last week. We tried to show what that looks like. What does $60 trillion physically, visually look like? But it's more than just spending. Bernie believes in the government taking over the utility companies and the energy companies and healthcare, like truly means of production type stuff here. Now, someone's going to say, he's a socialist, or someone will say he's a communist. Here's what's going to happen. During this debate, moving forward here, some conservative, you are going to be out, whatever, your friends in public, whatever, at work, and you're going to say, I don't like Bernie, he's a socialist. And you're going to come across one of his supporters. And people in the media, too, they're going to say, no, he's a democratic socialist, which, there's a difference. And, as if that's an argument, as if the difference is assumed. Oh, a democratic socialist? Oh, never mind then. But here's another thing you're going to hear. People on the left are going to say, oh, you don't even know what socialism is. Do you remember that picture we showed last week of the calls? This is the phone bank for Bernie Sanders. And this is what you're supposed to say. This is the script that you're supposed to say when someone calls, or when the Bernie supporter calls you and you say, socialism is scary to me, I don't like Bernie. And then the person, here's the script, how they condescendingly talk down to you. I understand how things can be scary, especially when we don't really understand them. Just condescending son of a... But I love the part down in the end. It says, we're just looking for something that's Bernie just wants something that's reliable and effective. That's what he means by democratic socialism, just reliable and effective. Right? Which plays perfectly to this idea that socialism is just being nice to each other. It's just helping each other. That's all socialism is. It's just helping. Now, Chris Matthews knows better. Chris Matthews knows it means, no, I'd probably get shot in the head in Central Park. Here's the deal with socialism, communism, fascism, whatever. Don't get too caught up with the exact specific definitions of each. You can if you want to, for your own intellectual whatever. But just know and help people understand that they're all of these different things are under the umbrella of collectivism. And that is in stark contrast to freedom. We can spend all day splitting hairs between the differences of communism, socialism, but in the words of Diana West, they all travel to the same soul-crushing destination of collectivism. She said this is a great line. She said, communists and socialists and democratic socialists and Fabians, progressives, Alinskyeites believe in the same centrally planned, varyingly totalitarian vision for America that our founding fathers would have had to declare independence from all over again. So while technically, yes, there's differences between socialism and communism, and we can talk about them, and we can nitpick over the differences in some college lecture hall, right? But actual socialists and communists don't even care. So I don't even really care. Now, don't take my word for it when I say they don't care. I got two examples. Rene Wormser, he was the general counsel of the Reese Committee. This is a 1952 congressional committee that looked into nonprofit groups and whether or not they were funding communism. He wrote a book in 1958, and he talked about the different types of communist thought that they were investigating and looking into around that time. And then he went into the differences between all the different types of thought. But then he wrote this. He says, but this line is by no means clear, right? The line between the differences. It's not clear. Socialism has the same ends as communism, though with an allegedly democratic approach. The Communist Manifesto of 1848 is the basis of all socialist parties the world over. And here's the key. Marx himself did not distinguish between socialism and communism. Marx himself did not distinguish. So we can spend all this time distinguishing between the differences, but he didn't even distinguish them. And I read that and I said, what are you talking about? Here's another proof. Harold Lasky. He's a British guy, big supporter of Stalin and Marxism. He wrote in 1947, he wrote the introduction to the new edition of the Communist Manifesto, all right? So they were publishing a new edition. He wrote the introduction to it. It's a big-time communist, Stalin, Marxist guy. And he wrote this because the question was, why is it called the Communist Manifesto? So he was addressing this. He said, why communist and not socialist manifesto? Obviously, in the first instance, because it was the official publication of the Communist League. And he goes on and gives a couple other maybe kind of reasons why this could be called the Communist instead of the Socialist Manifesto. He says, but the one thing that's certain from the document itself is that the choice of the term communist was not intended to mark any organizational separation between the Communist League and other socialist or working class bodies. On the contrary, Marx and Engels, Friedrich Engels, the guy who wrote it, the two guys who wrote it, were emphatic in their instance, not sort of vaguely touched, emphatic in their instance, that the communists do not form a separate party and that they ally themselves with all the forces which work towards a socialist society, dare I say, Bernie Sanders included. There's no difference between them. Says who? Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels. So you have all these Bernie supporters splitting hairs about communism and socialism, spending countless hours and writing papers written in college about the differences. And now we're having the same ridiculous conversation about the differences between socialism and democratic socialism. Get over it already. It's all the same. It's all collectivism. And it's definitely not freedom. So when someone says, well, communism and socialism and democratic socialism, they're all very different, my response to that would be, no, not really. Karl Marx himself thought that they were all means to the same socialist end. And Bernie's no different. Coming up next, we're going to talk to a guest about the importance of Western civilization, understanding Western civilization, Western history, the great books, and this is going to be our lead-in to what I think is I'm certain, if this happens, it's my favorite thing President Trump has done in his last 3 years. So that's coming up next. True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders, glad you're here. We are having technical difficulties with our guest, Stanley Kurtz. He has a new book called The Lost History of Western Civilization, but we're definitely going to get that figured out and talk to him this week. But this is good because it gives me more time to rant on one of my favorite things to rant about. This might be one of my favorite things that the president has ever done. And I'll just tell you this too. On my radio show, which I've been doing for 12 years, we talk a ton about art and architecture, and it doesn't work over the radio. I don't know why I do this. I just talk about how ugly buildings are and no one can see the building as they're driving down the street. So I'm super excited that we get to do this over the TV now. So Roger Scruton, who just passed away a couple weeks ago, brilliant conservative thinker. He wrote this great book, short, I think it's literally called A Short Introduction to Beauty. And in it he said, beauty is vanishing from our world because we live as though it did not matter. And beauty does matter. I bring this up. There's a new draft executive order making its rounds called Making Federal Buildings Beautiful Again. Yes, it's awesome. So the New York Times, they wrote about this. And in their headline, they were sure to note, it has drawn opposition from architects. So the president's new draft proposal on making federal buildings beautiful again has drawn opposition from architects. Oh, architects. You mean architects that made buildings like this? Those architects? That's Boston City Hall. Whatever we do, we can't offend architects who made that. Oh no. They're offended at this proposal? That's Boston City Hall. Don't want to offend them. By the way, this is the old City Hall in Boston. Look at that stunningly beautiful building. And they replaced that with this. You kidding me? Now that's just the beginning. The executive order says that any new federal buildings have to be built in a classical style inspired by Roman and Greek architecture. So this is going to be the new default. So Roman and Greek architectural style is going to be the new default of all new federal buildings in DC and across the country. So no more of this brutalist travesty or this modern crap. The group behind this, they're called the National Civic Art Society. We're going to talk to them later in the week as well. They say that current architecture has created a built environment that is degraded and dehumanizing. I couldn't agree more. Now, again, these top-notch architects are so offended at what the president's doing here. This is an architecture professor at the University of Maryland. He said, this is the New York Times article, at the most fundamental level, Trump's executive order is a complete restraint on freedom of expression. Oh yes, you're right. We must continue the freedom of expression like these federal buildings here. Yes. Look at all the expression. Go ahead, let's give us an, oh wow, look at all, so much expression. Let's see it, oh, that one's, wow. What is the architect trying to say? Oh, there's another beaut right there. So much expression. I want to be clear, those are 4 different buildings, just full of expression. Now, it's not just that brutalist garbage. This is in San Francisco. This is a more recent example of this expression that we're talking about. This is a federal building in San Francisco. That's a new building. They just built that. You're telling me these great architects who are so offended at the president, they got together, drew that, and said, bingo, nailed it. Let's do that. and all these architects and all these people and all these advisors, and then I'm sure people to sign off on it somewhere in the federal government or in San Francisco, whatever. Everyone to sign off on that, and they did that. They built that. That's a federal building. Are you kidding me? It's not just a problem in America. The Prince of Wales from decades ago had a great line. He said, you got to give this much to the Luftwaffe, the Nazis. When they knocked down our buildings in England, they did not replace them with anything more offensive than rubble. We did that. So here's an example. So there's a building in England that was destroyed by the Nazis, and it turned into rubble, but the Luftwaffe didn't come in and replace it with this. We did that and called it progress. Say what you want about Trump as a person, but he values beautiful architecture. Now, not all of his buildings are amazing, but I'll tell you one of the best is his new hotel in D.C. He took the old Washington, D.C. post office, which was finished in 1899. Look at that stunning building, absolutely stunning. And it was fallen down. It was abandoned, fallen down, turned it into a hotel. There's the inside of the Trump DC. It's called like the DC International Hotel or whatever, right? That's the inside lobby. So he turned into this beautiful hotel. The government was going to tear that thing down in the 70s. They were going to tear down that beautiful building. And in the 70s, they turned it into a mall and like office space, and it didn't work. And they were going to tear it down again. And then Trump came in and saved it, and it opened up in 2016. Vanity Fair magazine, they ranked it as the third worst hotel in the world. Because they hate Trump. Listen, I've been to some Motel 6s in my day. I have to, unless the two Motel 6s I've been to were the worst and the second worst, I have to imagine that I don't think Trump's hotel is the third worst. By the way, just so you can see again what we're talking about. So you saw the original DC post office, the beautiful building. This is what they replaced it with. So that's the beautiful one. Here's what that's the new post office headquarters in Washington, D.C. Isn't that amazing? Who would do that? Who would sign off on that? So this is not a new thing for Trump. Back in 2018, there's been a conversation for a long time, but in 2018, Trump talked about the FBI headquarters. And he talked about how awful they are. It is a quote. He said, honestly, I think it's one of the ugliest buildings in the city. So there's a debate about, that's the FBI building. There was a debate about moving the FBI headquarters to Virginia or Maryland. But Trump said, no, I want to keep it in downtown where it is. I just want to make it beautiful instead of that horrible thing. Throw that back up again, the FBI building. What a soulless, horrible. Again, it's not even an eyesore. Like, that's one thing if it was just heinous to the eyes. It's soul-crushing. It's absolutely soul-crushing. As you approach it, as you walk by it, as you walk into it, you can only imagine what the inside of that thing looks. How can you go to work there every day and not have that change you? Of course, it will change you as a person when you walk into that building. I want to prove that that's true. And I want to prove that Trump's right and that all these architects are wrong. I got to take a quick break. I want to come back, but I'm going to prove that everyone knows that those buildings are horrible. Everyone knows they're heinous. It's just whether or not you appreciate beauty or not. I'll prove that next. True story. Mike Slater. Spread the word. Hey, Slater Crusaders. We're talking about something I'm super passionate about. It's about art and architecture, specifically President Trump making this draft executive order that would require all new federal buildings in D.C. and around the country to be built with the old Roman and Greek inspiration, as opposed to this brutalist and modern crap that is scarring the landscape of our country. I feel so passionate about this because I think it's so important. Beauty, right? Plato talked about trying to find what's good, beautiful, and true. We'll talk about more of this in a second, but you can't just search for what's true. I mean, you have the morality of good, and then you have the importance of truth. But with that, you also have to find beauty. And the more I study this, the more I read about this, the more I realize how ugly our world is. So I live in the suburbs, and I'll never forget this. It was my brother-in-law, actually. He was driving across the country or something. And I said, oh, mentioned some place he stopped. And I said, oh, what's it like there? And he said, it's like everywhere else. And that really clicked me. There's a street right down the street. I live in San Diego. There's a street down the street from where I live called Carmel Mountain Road. And it's just like every other road. It's like every other suburb road. You got a Home Depot, a Boston Market, you got your Michael's and your gas station and your McDonald's, and there's like some ugly hotel like a Marriott and a Chase Bank, and you know what I mean? It's like the same, a Panera Bread, and it's just it's so ugly. Every building's the same, and we have that road, and then you go literally 3 miles south on the 15, and you have Mira Mesa Boulevard, and what do they have? Same thing. They have a Home Depot and a Michael's and a couple fast food places, and they have a Barnes and Noble, right? It's all the same crap, same ugly architecture, same traffic. It's just crap everywhere we drive, all the time. People talk, I don't want to go on a whole rant about San Diego. People talk about how beautiful San Diego is. It's really not that beautiful. It's pretty ugly here. The beaches are beautiful, but other than that, it's like a desert. It's an ugly desert. Everything's so ugly all the time, and then we just throw in this ugly architecture, and it's such a shame. So the fact that Trump sees and recognizes the need for more beauty, at least in what he can control with federal buildings, super encouraging. And we showed the picture of the FBI building. Like, there's no way you can go into that FBI building, the FBI headquarters in DC, and not have that change you. That is a soul-crushing building. What the heck is that part on the left-hand side that like juts out over the edge? What are they doing? What is that? Now, I want to prove to you that everyone knows this is true. It's just whether or not you choose to accept it or not. But everyone knows it's true. Everyone agrees with me, and everyone agrees with Trump. When you go to DC, no one ever says, oh, I can't wait to go see the FBI building. We gotta make sure, we gotta find some time to at least swing by the FBI building and take a couple pictures in front of it. No one says, oh, I can't wait to go see the Gelman Library on George Washington University's campus. It's such a beautiful, look at that. Can we please, Daddy, please, can we go to the Gelman Library? No, son, we can't go to the Gelman Library because we really have to go see the Housing and Urban Development headquarters in DC. You're gonna love it. You're gonna love the HUD headquarters. It's just such a wonderful building. Look at that. That doesn't look like something from Nazi Germany, Berlin. Sorry, son, no time for the FBI headquarters. We gotta go look at the HUD headquarters. No, of course not. No one ever does that. Because everyone wants to go see the White House and the Capitol building and the Supreme Court and the Jefferson Memorial. Look at the Jefferson Memorial here. You can't, those are on different different planets of beauty. That is and by the way, I think that's the least appreciated and visited memorial in DC, because you got to kind of walk out of the way to get to it. That thing's stunning. Look at that. Everyone wants to go see the Jefferson Memorial and the Lincoln Memorial because they're beautiful and everyone knows it. Our nation's capital is being destroyed by this brutalist and modern architecture. It's got to stop. This is our country, where did I read this? I'm stealing this line. It may have been Jesse Kelly. I don't remember. I'm taking credit for it. America's a good country. It also deserves to be a beautiful country. Right? We're a good country, and we deserve a capital with beautiful buildings. This is the National Gallery of Art, the West Building. That was finished in 1941. Beautiful, right? Classic, beautiful building. This is the East Wing, finished in 1978. So that was 1941. That was the West Wing. Here's the East Wing in 1948. This is by famed architect Ian Pei. Look at that. That's only 37 years difference between the two. That's 37 years of progress separating those two buildings. That's progress, as we're told. I just, it's so sad. I can't express the importance of this enough. We're going to talk about it a ton, and I'm going to drill it in your head until you agree with me on the importance of. A couple weeks ago, we talked with David Randall. I think what started it was we talked about Yale getting rid of their art history classes, and I asked this David Randall. I said, "What's the importance of this? Like, who cares, right? It's meaningless art history. When are we going to use this, right? Like the classic line." And he gave such a genius answer. I'll never forget it. Here he is.
Here's something from the 18th century philosophy of aesthetics, David Hume, Immanuel Kant. We use the ability to make judgments about art to learn how to make judgments about morality. When we can't even say what's beautiful, we don't know how to say what's good. Disassembling art makes it impossible for us to make moral judgments.
That's so good. We use the ability to make judgments about art to learn how to make judgments about morality. Like, whoever built that San Francisco building that we played in the last segment, we were showing in the last segment, whoever built that building, whoever designed that, I'm not going to listen to them about anything. They have, like, I question their morals. I question their moral integrity. I question their ability to even judge right and wrong. We use the ability to make judgments about art, because this isn't like, I think like this is pleasing to me, or I like this genre of music over this genre of music. That's not what I'm talking about here. This is ugly versus beautiful. And modern art, the whole thing is about questioning art and questioning beauty. What is art? What is an artist? And just therefore purposefully presenting things that are ugly to challenge the concept of beauty. And I completely reject every single aspect of that. So these people, I question their ability to make moral judgments. Because if we can't say what's beautiful, we don't know how to say what's good. Man, that's awesome. What do these ugly buildings say about us and our culture? What message do they send to the world about who we think we are? Progressives, as they try to destroy our culture, they're destroying art in the process, because art and morality are reflections of each other. Final insight here from David. I asked him which came first, right? So which came first? The erosion of art resulted in erosion of our national character and morals, or did our morals crumble and then therefore our art is a reflection of the crumble? And he took the question and acknowledged it, and then answered the real question. Here it is.
I would say that what comes first is teaching people that there is such a thing as beauty out there and that they ought to try to judge it. We don't need to worry yet whether it comes first from us or out there, but if we don't even try, we'll never see it.
Compare that thinking, that clear thinking, with this woman right here. This is Glenda Gilmore. She said on Twitter, she said, "This may not seem like the most dangerous thing we face," talking about Trump's executive order, "but it's one of the warning signs of fascism and, wait for it, genocide." Trump's executive order about making buildings beautiful again is a warning sign of genocide. The cult of antiquity and the imposition of monuments to a nation's mythical, glorious past. That's why we're going to talk with Stanley Kurtz again. We're going to be darned with these technical difficulties. We're going to talk to Stanley Kurtz about Western civilization. But here's this woman saying the imposition of monuments to a nation's mythical, glorious past, because from her perspective, the Western civilization is full of genocide and horrible people. It precedes both of those disasters, fascism and genocide. By the way, that's just a random woman. That woman is a Yale history professor. She's a Yale history professor who doesn't get what we just talked about with David Gilmour, those clips we just played. Unbelievable. Someone put on Twitter, they said, if you prefer classical Greek architecture, then you're probably a fascist with acute genocidal tendencies. And if you wrote this, what Glenda Gilmour wrote with a straight face, and you tweeted out to the world, then you're probably a historian at Yale. Who would have thought, this is our introduction to this topic. Who would have thought that it would be Donald J. Trump who would realign our minds and our souls to what is beautiful? True story. Mike Slater, spread the word. Slater Crusaders, we just talked about maybe my favorite thing that the president's done in the last 3 years. Now I want to talk about probably my least favorite thing that our president's done these last 3 years, but maybe redeeming himself here at the end in the home stretch of his first term, talking about spending. So we have now at least the beginnings of a budget proposal for 2021. In it, it says a bloated federal government with duplicative programs and wasteful spending remains a critical threat to America's future. Now, any report can say that and then do the opposite, but at least it acknowledges that truth. Now, this budget does three things that are worth talking about here. First, no more use it or lose it budgeting. This nonsense has got to stop. So we're going to talk with the head of this organization called Open the Books on Wednesday. These are the guys who do all the super boring work of going through all these numbers. But they wrote a report about the last few budgets. In our recent oversight report, we found $97 billion spent by 67 federal agencies during the final month of last year's budget. In the last week of the fiscal year, $53 billion in contracts went out the door. Check this fact out. That's 1 in every $10 spent in the entire year. Think about that. So 1/10 of all federal bureaucratic spending, 1/10 of it was spent in the final 1/52nd of the year. 1/10 of it all was spent in the last week. Why? Every bureaucracy has an incentive to spend all of their money at the end of the year. All the money that they've been budgeted, they have to spend it all, or else the government's going to come back in and say, oh, well, listen, clearly we gave you $1 billion, you only spent $500 million, so we're going to cut your budget next year. So the bureaucracy has an incentive. If they've only spent $500 million and they're coming up at the end of the year, they have an incentive to hurry up and spend all their money, waste it all, so that they can come back next and say, we would have, if only we had more money. We really would have been able to educate kids better, but we're out of money, plumb out of money, couldn't do it. So there's an incentive to spend and waste at the end, and you'd see the effect of it right there. What a screwed up incentive system that is. And I bet that infuriates the president, just at his soul. It's just like Trump as a businessman. Waste just rips his soul. You have like Obama, like Obama as a person. I don't even really mean this disparagingly. There's just different personalities. Barack Obama as a person, like wasteful spending, it doesn't click with him. But Trump as a businessman, like to his core, he would despise waste. Pretty similar, actually, to what we just talked about. To make federal buildings beautiful, again, executive order. Ugly architecture. I bet ugly buildings just grate Donald J. Trump's soul. And so does waste. I bet he looks at this, he's like, what are you guys talking about? He's always looking for the best deal, right? He's a businessman. So here's some of these year-end purchases that we're talking about, right? This is the last month of the year. $52,000 on inflatable games. Not even $34,000 on model rockets, $53,000 on tableware, $308,000 on alcohol, $1.7 million on musical instruments. Like, what do we even, what? And then lobster tail and crab, $4.6 million. For who? How much a lobster tail is that? That's year-end purchases. Like, it'd be one thing. I don't even know who's, like, how do you spend $4.6 million on lobster tail and crab throughout the year even? I don't even know what that means, but in the last month, you spend that much? I got more. 462 million spent on public relations and advertising, right? Because it's the end of the year. It's an easy thing to say, $400 million of advertising, and just spend it. And then $61 billion spent by the Pentagon in the last 30 days of the fiscal year. The VA bought a $12,000 foosball table on the last week. I understand maybe the VA buying a foosball table, maybe like for a hospital or something, but $12,000, you guys spend that's one nice foosball table. Each year. Oh, so that's the first one, right? So no more use it or lose it budgeting, right? We got to completely change that incentive system around. That's the first thing. Second thing, improper payments. All right, check this out. Every year, the 20 largest federal agencies admit to mistakenly paying out $140 billion. For example, we found that nearly $1 billion was improperly paid to dead people. All right, check this number. Here's your fact of the day. All right, you ready for your fact of the day? 6 million active Social Security numbers belong to people over the age of 112. All right, so there's 6 million active Social Security numbers for people over the age of 112. The problem with that is there's only 40 people in the world over the age of 112. So there's 40 people over 112, yet according to the federal government and Social Security, there's 6 million in America, and they're all receiving Social Security. So that would be under the category of improper payments. So let's clean that up a bit, shall we? Third thing, oversight on spending. The Trump administration's already eliminated 31,000 duplicate contracts. Look at that, could there be a duplicate contract? That means someone's getting paid twice. Is that what that is? Good for that guy. Saving taxpayers $27 billion since 2017. In the budget, they commit to doing more, including comparison shopping, volume discounts, and negotiating better deals. Trump always wants a better deal. And that means better deals for you. Most presidents are bureaucrats. Right? They're bureaucrats. They want to spend as much as possible because they see themselves as working for the contractors. They see themselves as working for the suppliers, not you. Right? So so in San Diego, our example of this is Lorena Gonzalez. Okay? We're all over the country right now, so Lorena Gonzalez doesn't make any sense, but you have your own Lorena Gonzalez. Okay, Lorena Gonzalez, she used to be literally the head of the labor unions in San Diego, and she used to lobby Sacramento to do what she wants. But then one day she's like, well, this is stupid. I'm just going to run for assembly. And she won. So now she's in the assembly, and she can just do whatever she wants herself. She doesn't need to waste time lobbying an assembly person. Anyway, so she's like the ultimate union goon. Awful. And you have your own Lorena Gonzalez. Her job, as she sees it, is to take as much as your money and give as much as possible to it to the unions. That's her sole job. That's her purpose for existence on this planet, is to take as much money as possible from you before you light stuff on fire and run to the Capitol. Take as much as possible and give it to the unions. We're renovating the San Diego airport. It's a perfect example of that. Right? Trump's approach is to build the best airport for the least amount of money as possible. Right? Her incentive, and any bureaucrat's incentive, is to build really a pretty terrible airport, which would constantly require more union maintenance work to fix it up, and build it like a pretty awful airport for as much money as possible. The incentives are completely, totally backwards. And I think we all agree we want more of the Trump's approach. Let's say NASA's grounded moon rocket has $3 billion cost overrun. The agency spent $1.1 million to prepare the nation's religions for the discovery of extraterrestrial life. That should go. The Air Force bought $1,200 coffee cups. I want to be clear, not many coffee cups that ended up costing a total of $1,200. Each coffee cup cost $1,200 for a grand total of $350,000. And then the U.S. Census has a cost overrun of $3.3 billion. Okay. If your thought is, I got to spend as much money as possible, then these are great programs. But if you're Donald Trump and your job is to spend as little money as possible, I think we can do without the $1,000 coffee cups. I don't think we need to spend $1 million to prepare the nation's religions for the discovery of extraterrestrial life. You know, those things can go. So again, we're going to talk on Wednesday with the head of the organization, Open the Books. Again, these are the guys who go through all this and find all this ways to cut. But the big picture goal, again, we got to change the incentives. I don't know how to do that, so we'll talk more about that on Wednesday. Maybe where the incentive now is to spend as much as possible, maybe you change it where if you're running a bureaucracy and you cut your spending, then you get some sort of bonus. You personally get more money and your employees then get more money that you can disperse down. I don't know how to do it, but it's got to get done. The taxpayer has to start to be considered first, not for the best interest of the contractors or the lobbyists. And truly, if Trump can get spending in line, then the policies that he's had these last 3 years would be darn near perfect. And then the difference between the Democrats and the Republicans would be even more clear, to bring it around to the very first segment of the show. You compare real cutting of spending to Bernie's $60 trillion in new spending, and we're on totally different planets. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to talk with Meg Meeker, one of my favorites. She's got a new book out about how to be a good dad to daughters, and also our very own Rob Smith. He was at that hearing the other day with AOC when she said it's impossible to pull yourself up by your bootstraps, and Rob Smith came back, our very own contributor at the First, came back and just demolished her with, let me tell you my story of pulling myself up from my bootstraps. He only had 5 minutes to do it in Congress, so we're going to be able to get more time and hear more of his story. It's a true story. My name is Mike Slater. We'll see you tomorrow. Spread the word.